Serious, night owls of Reddit, what is the creepiest thing that happened to you when everyone else was sleeping? So back when I was living way out in the countryside, I used to have to drive a good 20 minutes just to get to a county maintained road, and then another 40 minutes into the city to go to school and work. I'd go to school in the mornings and then work with a video production company filming weddings and bar mitzvahs and such. The events tended to run well past midnight, and then we'd have to break down and transport all the gear, lock up the shop, and then it'd be an hour of driving to get back to my girlfriend's family's home way out in the ranch land. I'm driving home one night, probably 2 or 3 a.m., exhausted and probably in need of a tall glass of water if you follow, and I get to the end of the pavement and start blasting down this tiny dirt road, in that real country dark where all you can see is a little cone of headlight. Mesquite bushes and desert grass make this sort of wall on either side of the road, so it's like driving down a little chute of scraggly little branches, and I'm coming around this corner when up in the road is this freaked up looking thing. I slam on the brakes and shoot this wall of dust out ahead of me, but through the dust, sitting centered in the beam of my headlights, is this white, hunched figure. It has long legs and haunches like a jackrabbit, but it's a good 4 feet high and kinda lumpy, like an illustration from those scary stories books, and I am terrified. It kinda rocks a little bit and shivers, and I'm looking at this thing and it makes no sense at all the way it's shaped. I stare at it for a good minute, just idling in the middle of this road trying to make up some kinda story to myself to explain what the heck I'm looking at, but I am completely stumped. So I start creeping the car forward, and as I'm getting close enough to see the shapes of its muscles and the shine of fur, the thing hops up, and the bit I thought looked like a head with a long ear stretches up and out, changing its whole shape like something out of the Thing, and I about screamed. Still nearly invisible, except for its white striped legs and underbelly, this black cow that had been sitting at the edge of the road stood up, showing part of its body that had been hidden behind a folded black leg, and staggered off into the bushes to find a spot to sleep where people weren't blasting it with high beams. I felt like an idiot later, but in that moment where it was rising up and like unfolding itself, if I had run off before I saw what it really was, I'd be swearing to this day I saw Chupacabra or a demon or some craziness. Call me weird, but sometimes when I can't sleep I get bored and get out of bed. I go to the window and look out of it for a bit. I dunno, it just kinda calms me seeing my backyard in the moonlight. I find it peaceful. Anyway, I was looking out the window when I saw a figure jump the fence. Too big to be a cat, it was human shaped. The person made the motion with their head that they were looking around frantically, then they hid behind a bush. I was petrified. For what seemed like an eternity, they stayed there. Then they ran to the other side of the backyard and jumped that fence over into my neighbors. I never knew who it was or what they were doing. I always suspected that maybe they were being chased or something. It just really freaked me out. So, I was at my grandmother's house in the Mississippi countryside. I didn't know it at the time, but my grandma's neighbor has pet peacocks. The thing about peacocks is that when they squawk, it sounds like a human being desperately crying for help. Imagine being me, out on my grandma's porch swing, at 2 a.m., hearing continuous human sounding cries for help. I was terrified. That, and mountain lion screams are what terrify me about nature. I went to bed around 3 a.m. as I usually do. Laying in bed for an hour or so, just started drifting off to sleep when I hear knock knock. Doesn't sound like something falling down. It's perfectly in rhythm for someone knocking on a door. At 4 a.m. That's bad enough, but it wasn't on the door. It was on an outside wall of my bedroom, a few feet from my head. My bedroom is on the second floor by the garage, so if it was someone knocking, and at that point I was sure it was, they were either in the attic over the garage or on the roof of the garage. I pulled out my phone and checked the garage door. It had been closed for hours. Not someone in the garage. On the roof? Doesn't seem likely. I lie awake for a couple of hours but don't hear anything else. My best guess is it was a stick that was being blown by the wind, but it really sounded like someone knocking. Could have been an auditory hallucination. They ain't common right before you drift off. I get them pretty often, and I usually need my husband to help me differentiate between what was a real sound and what was just my imagination. They are extremely real sounding feeling. Most of the problems I experience at night come down to my own dang fault. I love listening to scary story narrations, and one night I was falling asleep listening to one of my favorites at the time. I don't remember what woke me up, but all I remember was hearing someone speaking to me in the dark. I practically jumped awake and bolted for the kitchen where the knives were, only to realize that I was on hour 8 of a 10-hour horror special. This happened to me with a Tool album. I think it was Enema. Anyways, I guess I fell asleep at some point and woke up to blaring static and voices coming from my radio, and it freaked me the frick out. Now I try to fall asleep to calmer music. I can't tell you how many times people have walked into my apartment over the past 13 or so years thinking it's theirs. Most of the time I don't realize the door isn't locked, as I wasn't the last one out of the house. I'm typically on the couch playing Xbox or something, and some person just walks in and scares the living crap out of me. But one time, this guy comes in and looks really confused. He then asked me if Julian was here or something like that. I just had to tell him no, and he had the wrong apartment. Ever since then I make sure the door is locked every night. At about 3 in the morning I was playing video games in my living room when my front doorknob turns but doesn't open. So I ran over to it, locked it, looked through the blinds, and there was a Seekhead standing on my front patio. About a month ago, I was in bed at around 3 AM looking at my phone in my pitch black room when I noticed a very faint, blinking white light being emitted from my front camera. I thought my eyes were just playing tricks on me, but even when I turned my screen off I could still see it, very faint but definitely there. After that I turned my phone off and tried to go to sleep. Logically, I know it's probably nothing, but just the thought of someone watching me through the camera was enough to make me put a piece of tape over it for the following weeks. Zuckerberg has tape over his webcam on his laptop. I figured if he, of all people, does this, maybe it's not such a bad idea. I was working from home, third shift, and about 2 AM, I heard the stuff on the coat rack in the living room rattle like it does when the door opens. I thought it might be my cat climbing on the coats, and went to get her down, and found not a cat climbing things she knows she's not allowed on, but a person I didn't know standing in the middle of my living room. He demanded to know where his stuff was, and after me insisting for about 5 minutes I had no clue who the frick he was. He threatened me. My phone was in my room, and I wasn't willing to turn my back on this guy, so I reached for the katana my mother had gotten me for my birthday, sitting against the wall behind me. I got to chase a man out of my apartment with an actual sword. Unfortunately, the whole experience freaked me out so bad that now I keep the sword next to my bed in case of noises in the night. I also lock the door. I'm a night auditor at a hotel. One night at around 3 AM the phone starts ringing, and the caller ID shows room 112, which is the hotel's fitness center. I pick up the phone, and all I hear is heavy breathing from the other end. Since all the rooms are outside entrance only, I lean over, while still on the phone, and look out the security window towards the door to the fitness center. Door is closed and lights turned off. After not getting a response, I then ask is everything okay, and immediately afterwards the phone clicks. Without taking my eyes off the door, I leave the office and I head over to the fitness center. I shine a flashlight in through the window to inspect the room, and empty. I walk in and look around the small room, and yep, empty. I checked the phone, and the handset was still on the receiver. I then headed back to the office, and as soon as I sit down the phone starts ringing again and the caller ID says room 112. I whisper to myself frick that, and pick up the phone and immediately hang up. Nothing else happened after that. A long while back when I was still a teen and living with my parents, I wanted to listen to some music but it was quite late. I went downstairs to the garage and decided to listen to music in my car. After a while it was quiet as I was deciding on the next CD to play when I heard what sounded like leaves crunching outside. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw a figure coming up the driveway. The motion activated floodlight on the garage did not illuminate as the figure approached the front door. I quickly and quietly head back inside and go up to the kitchen where I could get a view of the front door. It was still quite dark, but I could make out the shape of a person standing at the front door. They stood there for a moment before I hear a knock. Obviously, this is strange for a quiet neighborhood at 3 AM. I reach for my phone and dial the police, but after waiting for another minute that felt like an eternity. The person turned around and walked away back down the drive and into the street. being careful to avoid the only street light. Before the police had arrived, he was gone. They started to search the area but found no one. One officer came to ask questions and get a description, but it was so dark I couldn't make out anything useful. To this day, I still have no earthly clue why this happened. Dang, something similar happened to me last summer. It was about 10 PM and I was downstairs watching TV while my mom was in the kitchen making herself some dinner. It was really quiet downstairs and we heard someone lightly knocking on our front door. We didn't see who it was, and when we tried to look out of one of the kitchen windows to see if anyone was at the front doorstep, no one was there. When I was like in 6th grade, I was being up late as I always do, just about to drift off to sleep when I saw flashing blue and red lights. I then heard stop and back here, and I look out my window to see a shadowy figure run up my street and jump into my backyard. Both of my parents were asleep at the time and I was too afraid to wake them as I feared that the guy was in my house. I then proceeded to see an entire police unit pull up to my street with a full search party to find this man. Parents slept through the whole thing and I still don't know what happened to the guy. He's still in your house. I used to live out in the middle of the country in Arkansas. I lived alone at the time, at a property my mother would rent out occasionally. It was a large, 3-bedroom home, 2 stories. This house was right on the highway. A dirt road connected to that highway and led to houses that were a few acres behind my own. It was around midnight one night when I was still awake in the room where I kept my PC. All the lights were off. Suddenly, I could have sworn that I heard voices on the front porch of my home. My PC room was connected to that porch by a window. I immediately tensed up and listened. I couldn't make much out, but I was still so sure I heard someone speaking. Another detail about the house at that time was that the front door and most of the windows, thank God not the case for the one in my office, didn't have blinds or any means to cover them. Up to this point, since I lived in the middle of freaking nowhere, I didn't lock my doors most of the time either. Looking back, I think I had my front door locked, but at the time I couldn't remember if it was. There were far too many exposed windows to just walk up to it and lock it too. At least to my paranoid mind that night. Most of my lights were off thankfully though, so I slipped back to my bedroom, which was down the hallway, grabbed my shotgun again. It's Arkansas. Locked the door to my bedroom and waited. I still remember putting my iPhone to the base of the door, turning on the camera, and using it to see out into the connecting hallway in case someone had come inside. Thankfully I never saw anyone. I finally fell asleep a few hours later. Later though, I heard about how a neighbor on my dirt road had a son that had been arrested in another state. Their son had broken out and fled back home to that exact freaking house around the time I heard those voices on my porch. He'd been tracked down eventually and arrested there, only half a mile from my home. Man, I would have thought living miles away from the nearest person who could help you would be extra reason to lock your doors. Not too long ago, I snuck out to go get high and drunk with my friends and ended up at home at around 2 in the morning. As I stumbled back into bed from climbing in through my window, a man knocked on the window. I almost shat myself. A man in a full tuxedo, small briefcase-like bag and glasses said to me after reopening the window, "What have you been doing tonight?" I responded, "Who the frick are you?" I then slammed the window and shut the blinds, and I am still wondering WTF happened that night. You clearly missed your chance to escape your normal life for a world of magical wonder as a sorcerer's apprentice. I was probably 14 at the time, and I was sitting in my living room playing Xbox. With the way my living room is, the front door to my house is basically right behind where our TV and couch were set up. I saw a shadow move across the wall that's opposite the door. We have windows on the sides of the door, and there's a street light directly outside. And at first I thought it was my eyes playing tricks on me, but then I heard the doorknob rattle around for about 10 seconds straight. I went into a panic and slapped my hands on my mouth out of terror, and after the rattling stopped I heard some talking, and then footsteps leaving my doorstep. I'm guessing they were just looking for houses with unlocked front doors, as my neighbors 2 streets down got robbed that night. But the pure dread of hearing the door rattle still spooks me out to this day. Was staying the night at a friend's house in high school cause I think she had an EKG the next day and wasn't allowed to sleep for it. She knew I was a night owl, so she usually invited me over to keep her company and make sure she didn't snooze off whenever this happened. So one of these nights, we're sitting in her room around 2:30 or 3 am. Her parents and little brother had all gone to bed sometime around 10ish, and none had exited their rooms since. So we're sitting there, chatting about whatever we would have been chatting about at that time, and her doorbell freaking rings. Now keep in mind, she has a pretty distinctive doorbell sound. It's not a simple ding or chime, but more of a short music white tune, so we knew we couldn't have misheard it. So we saunter out into the living room, me leading, in pitch blackness, because we weren't allowed to turn on the lights after her parents went to sleep, and the only light in the room from the hallway is coming from the moonlight shining through the clear screen door where the doorbell was. From our position, we can't make out anyone near the doorway outside, and we kinda just laugh it off and credit it to our imaginations or a fluke. Then as we're walking back down the dark hall to her room, we freaking hear it again. At that point, my friend decided to freaking step outside to look around, which is something I don't think she'd ever have decided to do if she wasn't so sleep deprived. She's usually pretty faint-hearted if we're being honest, and even though I thought we could have figured out a better plan, I had her back, so I quickly followed her outside and stepped onto her brick driveway, just about ready to fight if we needed to. For the life of us, we couldn't figure out what happened. She lived in a pretty affluent neighborhood with big, spacious, well-mowed yards, so you'd have thought we'd seen some dashing away if they had simply rang the bell and ditched. And each side of the house on our left and right were fenced off pretty high, and it was unlikely they would have been able to run and leap over. We timidly checked around her car, even inside and under it, and just nothing. No signs anyone had been there or around the yard. To this day, I have no clue what was going on outside, maybe a faulty doorbell, but she insisted after that it never had problems, and after that it hadn't since the occurrence. Still kinda gives me chills thinking of it. I had a doorbell set off by a spider inside the button box before. Turns out they are conductive enough to bridge the connection in the switch. Oh, I've got two decent ones. The first one is the time I made the mistake of watching The Ring at like 3 in the morning, back when I still lived in my great-grandmother's house, which she had insisted was haunted. As I was watching the film, scared out of my mind, I suddenly heard a loud crash from the basement. I must have jumped a foot in the air, but I calmed myself down by claiming it was just probably my cat. So I looked over to edge of the blanket I was laying on, only to find my cat even more panicked than I am. Now I'm telling myself that something was probably just off balance and finally fell over. Just a coincidence. I calmed myself down and resumed the film. Then, not 15 seconds later, I feel something. It felt like it was about the size of a hockey puck, but shaped like the lens of a magnifying glass, slide under the blanket. I froze. It was right at the small of my back. I was too panicked to move. Then it started vibrating. I immediately took off up the stairs and hid in the bathroom for about a half an hour. After I'd calmed down, I went to try and see just what that even was, and found not a trace of anything that shouldn't have been there. I did not sleep that night. The other time was either a vivid nightmare, or a case of sleep paralysis or night terrors or whatever it's called. I had suddenly woken in the middle of the night one day, only to find that I couldn't move my body. Don't panic. I remember telling myself, you know what this is, so just close your eyes and go back sleep. I'd continued, and I tried, but then I started to notice a faint sound, like the high-pitched whine of a camera readying its flash. It just kept getting louder and louder, and more high-pitched. Just when it was becoming truly unbearable, it just stopped. I thought that was the end of it, so I made the mistake of opening my eyes again. Now standing before me was a shadowy figure in the shape of a man. Trying to look directly at him felt like trying to stare at those little shadows, those little flashes of movement that you see in your peripheral vision sometimes. It was uncomfortable, even though I couldn't make out a face. It felt like he was trying to stare right through me, leering so maliciously. It felt like standing before a predator waiting to strike its prey. That's when I felt it. Something slowly dragging itself over me. The sensation like someone raking ice cold soaking wet denim over my skin. Tendrils made of shadows were slowly but surely attempting to smother me. I still couldn't move. The tendrils finally reached my mouth, And that's the last bit I remember. I abruptly woke up hours later after the sun had come out, feeling like it had just happened 30 seconds ago. I've never experienced sleep paralysis since. Freaking sleep paralysis is so terrifying. Almost always seems to be accompanied by some figure or touch. I mainly only get it when I sleep on my back, so I avoid that like the plague. TLDR. Almost burned alive, along with the whole house, by a tweaker. Probably. My life was saved by being a night owl. I was finishing a book at around 4 AM and decided to go get a drink of water and investigate a weird smell of burning plastic that I hadn't noticed. Since I had been in the midst of a good book, I opened my bedroom door to my mother's wheeled set of drawers. Caddy, something she used as a hairstylist who had a chair in our dining room for doing hair on the side at home. Whatever it was in our living room and on fire. My mother was asleep on the couch right next to it, and my sister was just a few feet away in her room. I was surprised to say the least. I yelled fire to wake up my mom, told her to get my sister, and I went back into my room to get my phone to call 911. We went outside and stood in our lawn as the flames started to consume the living room, finally hitting some of my mother's hair products. The window shattered just after I pulled my mother back from going back inside to get her purse. She had, inexplicably, a bunch of cash in her purse on the couch. Glad I pulled her back though. Eventually the fire department came. Neighbors came out to see what was going on. I wasn't wearing any pants or shoes. My reptiles died in the fire, and I was pretty devastated. Why is this creepy? Well, how did the fire start? I don't know. My mother was married to a adult skinhead scumbag. And where was he when the fire started? Outside, tweaking over his many paranoias. This guy was a nightmare. Did he start it? I don't know. At the time he seemed as surprised as we were, but I wonder sometimes. Glad this story has a happy ending despite all your loss, and I am so sorry for that. That's why I have trust issues. If I was your mom, I would have left that creepy man. So to start, let me make it clear I was young, naive and trying to be helpful. I was working a night shift at a customer service job when I was about 19. I'm a male, lightweight, and I don't really work out, and I never carry anything for self-defense, because I don't really have much on me that I consider valuable to lose. I also didn't think much of it. I believe it was a weekend and there are quite a few bars nearby, so I wasn't concerned about being robbed, to be honest. So I get off at about 2 AM, and I'm working in Syracuse, NY. Someone came up to me after I got in my car and asked if I had a lighter. I just politely explained I didn't, and so he asked if he could hitch a ride right down the street, and for whatever reason I thought, sure, why not? I was kinda bored and wanted to see where this could take me. In hindsight, this was dumb as frick. Well, down the street about a quarter mile, this guy asks me to pull over and he gets out of the vehicle. It becomes clear to me this guy is homeless. He walks over to the bus stop and takes out a makeshift cigarette and lighter from a hiding spot he made and walks back over to the car and asks for a ride back since he didn't have any transportation. At this point I said frick it. Again, I have no clue why I was stupid enough to go along with this. So he gets back in. I drive down the road and he asks me to stop and pull over so he can get out. He was actually pretty chill up to this point, and we had some cool conversation. But as soon as we pulled over, he just kinda stopped being cool and just stared straight and wouldn't say a word. Immediately my heart sank, and I thought I was dead. I just looked over at him and asked if he was good a few times, and then said have a good night, I gotta get home. Whatever episode he was having, he seemed to snap out of and said thanks and got out of the car. I'm like 80% sure if I panicked he would have escalated it and attacked me. He just had that look like he was about to do something awful, but couldn't muster up the courage to do it, and I like to think that me being personable enough kept him from doing it. Or maybe he just couldn't see anything of value. Now I just have a no hitch policy. It seems kind of fricked up, especially since I can honestly say I was at fault here, but since then I just don't feel comfortable giving strangers rides. TLDR. Gave a homeless man a ride. Pretty sure I almost got murdered if not for being poor and nice. Grew up 20 minutes south of Syracuse, and dude, I honestly think you're lucky to be alive. Syracuse sucks. I'm a backshift security guard at a retirement home, and I'm starting to believe this place is haunted. I know the tag says serious, but I am dead freaking serious. I've been here since last September, and early on one of the other guards, a lovely young woman named Charlotte, made a passing reference to this place being haunted. I laughed it off, treated it as a joke, but no, apparently she's seen crap, and in the month since I've started seeing crap too. Strange shapes moving just at the corner of my vision when I'm alone, or faces in open doorways that vanish when I try to focus on them. I brushed all this off, just the sleepiness catching up to me, right? A month or two back we had a resident pass away. His room is right behind where I am sitting now. The doorway isn't 5 feet from me, and 2 weeks ago, while I'm alone and reading Reddit to stay awake, I feel someone tap my left shoulder. Other than me, there's 4 people in this wing. The resident I'm watching, whom I am directly facing and am immediately aware if he leaves his room. Another resident who is senile and has a room in the corner, well within my view. Another resident who is wheelchair bound and rarely leaves his room, so I would know if he left. And a 4th who is bedridden in the other room behind me. So unless the bedridden resident made a miraculous recovery, snuck out of his room, tapped my left shoulder when his room is on my right, and then snuck back into his room before I could check, who the frick tapped my shoulder? That brings us to tonight. The plumbing in Ambrose, RIP, bathroom spontaneously started running earlier tonight, as if someone was in there using the washroom. As long as I knew him, Ambrose was bedridden. Some weird crap goes on here. I'm a backshift security guard. Some weird crap goes on here. You could even say it's backshift crazy. Went for a bike ride at 3 AM. This is normal for me because no one is out and I love the cool breeze. Riding down the bike path, I see a group of people in the distance. I pull over to the right so I can pass them without bothering them. As I got closer, I thought they were dancing to music. Something IDK, just lots of odd movement. I get even closer and I see it's a bunch of people dressed in long black goth-like trench coats, black spiky hair, white Victorian makeup all over their face with black eyeliner. They were chanting in what sounded like Latin and worshipping the sky. I guess they were worshipping the dark or the moon. Just do what you like, IDC. I passed them minding my own business and one of them screamed "you" and started sprinting after me on my bike. I freaking booked it and got the frick out there down the track. I didn't stop all night, I just kept riding as fast as I could until I got home. Couldn't sleep all day. I'll just point out it was probably some Wiccans or pagans doing a ceremony and one decided to make some laughs and did that. I was 8 and I needed to use the restroom, so I sneakily sneaked out of the sleepover pile of children and went to the in-bedroom bathroom. I opened the door, but the girl whose house we were staying at was on the toilet. She didn't make a noise but covered herself. So I quickly spun back around to go back to my spot to wait patiently for my turn. Except she was still in her bed, completely asleep. I turned back around and she was gone. I closed the door behind me, did my business, constantly looking around for that girl I saw. The door never opened, and I saw no trace of any other human in that bathroom, not in the closet, under the sink, in behind the curtains, nowhere. Of course that freaked 8-year-old me out. I used to work as a power plant operator and had to work night shifts. Every time I would do my rounds up in the boiler house on the 8th floor, the lights would flicker sporadically. I found out later that a contractor had died in that exact area a couple years earlier from a heart attack. I work a 6 PM to 6 AM night shift at a hospital for security. Honestly, the scariest thing is when you go upstairs and the patients are sleeping. One time I was walking by and I heard a dude snoring, so I didn't look in. As I walked by, no less than 15 minutes later, he was staring straight at me and made eye contact. I don't make much noise while walking as I wear comfy shoes due to the amount of time I tend to spend on my feet. Really freaked me out though. I think he was sent to a better hospital for better care due to some mental illness. Freaky. When I was really young, I lived out in the middle of nowhere. There was my house and my grandma's less than a mile away, so I spent a lot of time with her. She is really religious and bare me over the head with religion. I was aware of my own mortality before I was 4. Well, one part of the stories she told stuck with me and I couldn't get out of my head. The part where the end of the world would be marked by 7 trumpets. When I was about 7 or 8 AM, oil rig was built not far from where I lived. and every night I'd hear the horns from the oil rig and freak out. I don't know how late I'd stay up, but I'd only go to sleep when I got so exhausted that I'd pass out. I knew it was the oil rig the entire time, but still, it'd terrify me. I'd have panic attack about the end of the world and my own death. Getting mind fricked with fear by religion as a child sucks. I was raised in a cult and it was terrifying in ways. This happened a few years back. It was on a December, and I was staying in my family's second home in Mexico. I was alone, with the lights on. I didn't want to sleep, so I watched some anime. At around 1-2 am I hear a loud bang on the outside of my bedroom door. I freaked out and scrambled to get the nearest blunt object I could find. I patrolled the house. Nothing. Next I started knocking on the surface of any material I could find, hoping that I had just misheard it. I start running out of things to tap until I tap my bedroom door. It made the same sound. I couldn't fall asleep after that, and I rose with the sun the following morning. At the time I was sharing a house with 4 other people. I do a lot of rotating shift work, and this night I was preparing for work the next night by staying up watching movies until stupid o'clock. My housemates all turned in for the night, so I moved my movie marathon into my room where it would be less disruptive to their sleep. Another movie or two in and I start to hear a scratching noise at my window. Initially I don't think much of it, just a branch or something I think. Back to watching my movies. The scratching continues, and after about 10 minutes I remember that there aren't any trees outside my window. This started to make me feel a little uneasy. I went to the other side of my room and retrieved my just-in-case defensive tool, which happened to be sword, approximately 1 meter long, and went back to watching movies. Not 2 minutes later, my window slid upwards, the sudden breeze lifting my blinds. Reflexively I stood up and drew my sword. It made the most glorious noise I'd heard. The window promptly slid shut with a solid thud. Adrenaline still pumping, I decided it would be a good idea to have a look outside. I checked the yard and couldn't see anyone. At that point I felt like I had imagined the whole thing. I returned to my bedroom and carried on as I had planned. The next day I brought it up with a couple of my housemates. It turns out that it had happened at every window around the house. Mine was just the only one that would open. Freaked me out for a little while. I can picture this perfectly. The dude tries to softly slide the window open, thinks that he's successful, then FFFSSSSSHHHH. Slam. I was watching a horror movie in my room. I heard something crash in the kitchen. I went outside to inspect. Nothing was out of order. When I came back to my room, I swear the light was turned off when I didn't leave it that way. It fricked me up. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.